The morning sunlight filtered through the tall courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. I sat quietly on a wooden bench, hands folded in my lap, staring at the worn tiles beneath my shoes. My palms were steady, my breathing calm, but inside, every nerve felt alert, ready for the storm I knew was coming. The courthouse was alive with the low hum of activity, lawyers discussing their cases in hushed tones, the clicking of polished shoes against the marble, the distant echo of a gavel. To anyone else, it might have seemed mundane. But to me, every sound carried significance. Each footstep could signal a shift in power, each whisper a piece of information I could use. I had been here before many times, but never like this. Not in the last 15 years. I had lived my life alongside Ethan, my husband, balancing the scales between compromise and survival. Welcome to my channel. If you're watching this on Facebook, don't forget to follow the page. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you enjoyed the story, let me know in the comments below. You can also share your thoughts from the heart in the comments, so I can create more stories based on what you love. Thank you for your support. Always careful to not make waves, always careful to be invisible when necessary. Today, invisibility wasn't a choice, it was my shield. Across the hall, voices rose and fell. Ethan's laughter carried easily, confident and practiced, echoing off the marble walls. That laugh, once comforting, now grated on my nerves. It wasn't a sound of joy. It was a sound of arrogance, of a man who believed he had already won. I straightened my back and exhaled slowly. Focus. Patience. Precision. The clerk's voice cut through the ambient noise. Walker, Evelyn Walker, please proceed to courtroom 3. I rose, smoothing my coat, a modest navy blue jacket, nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. My lawyer had advised me on the exact image to project: calm, composed, underestimated. I followed her instructions carefully. Every step, every gesture, calculated. Ethan was already in the courtroom. He lounged in his chair with the ease of a man accustomed to authority. His suit was impeccably tailored. His posture was perfect. Confidence radiated from him in a way that was almost tangible. He did not glance at me. He did not need to. He assumed, as always, that I would cower, that I would be intimidated by the history and the display of power. Beside him, a woman sat quietly, observing. Her presence was deliberate, calculated. She leaned lightly toward him, eyes sharp, lips curved in a self-satisfied smile. She was an accessory, a statement, look at the life I am claiming. But she was irrelevant. I did not allow myself the distraction. The judge entered, and the room settled into an expectant hush. Everyone rose, then sat. The proceedings began with Ethan's lawyer speaking first. His voice was smooth, confident, rehearsed. He listed properties, bank accounts, vehicles, investments, a precise inventory of control. Each item was delivered like a weapon, a declaration of dominance. I listened silent, absorbing every word. None of it surprised me. I had anticipated every claim, every number, every line of argument. My preparation had been exhaustive, meticulous. Then it was my lawyer's turn. She did not rush. She did not interrupt. She waited, letting Ethan and his legal team exhaust themselves, letting their confidence grow unchecked. Your Honor, she began, calm and deliberate, before responding to the proposed division, we would like to submit additional documentation into evidence. Ethan's head snapped toward me, his smirk faltering for the first time. The woman beside him stiffened, her composure cracking slightly. Additional documents? His lawyer asked, clearly irritated. Yes, my lawyer replied, voice steady. Documents submitted within the legal time frame, copies provided to all relevant parties. These records provide clarity on previously undisclosed assets. The judge raised an eyebrow. Proceed. A folder was handed to the clerk and then to the judge. Pages were flipped. The courtroom quieted further. Each document, each financial statement, each record was a carefully laid brick in a wall that Ethan could not see crumbling beneath him. What is this? Ethan finally demanded, voice tight. These are financial disclosures, the judge said, scanning the pages. Accounts not included in prior filings. Ethan's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. This is impossible, Ethan said, disbelief lacing his tone. It appears otherwise, my lawyer replied, unflinching. The judge looked directly at him. Mr. Walker, can you explain why these accounts were omitted from your declaration? Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. He was unprepared. His armor of confidence had gaps, and they were being exposed systematically. My lawyer continued. Additionally, Your Honor, there are properties purchased during the marriage, registered under third parties, but funded through shared resources. We submit them as evidence of joint investment and entitlement. The woman beside him went pale. Her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her seating. Ethan's reaction was sharp, almost desperate. That's not accurate, he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. The judge carefully examined the folder, flipping pages slowly. This court will require time to review all documents. Today's ruling is suspended until verification is complete. A tense silence filled the courtroom. Ethan had no immediate response. His confident veneer cracked, revealing uncertainty for the first time. After adjournment, I walked into the sunlight outside the courthouse, the warmth on my face a stark contrast to the cold tension inside. I felt a quiet triumph, not of revenge, but of clarity, of control finally returning to my hands. My lawyer joined me, walking a step behind. You handled that perfectly, she said softly. Step by step, he's boxed in. I nodded. Years of preparation, years of careful observation, years of quiet endurance had led to this moment. I was finally moving from the background into the center of my own life. The following days brought a flurry of activity. Ethan's attempts to assert dominance became frantic. Calls, emails, challenges, all failing because my lawyer's strategy was airtight. Each document submitted, every piece of evidence was precise, verifiable, undeniable. Meanwhile, the woman who had accompanied him, the symbol of his arrogance, began to retreat. Her confidence faltered, her influence diminishing as Ethan's control slipped away. I spent hours reviewing every detail. Every transaction, every account, every property had been accounted for, cross-referenced, and verified. There was no room for dispute, no way for Ethan to manipulate facts. Reality was on my side, methodically documented, undeniable. At the next court session, the tension was palpable. Observers whispered, noting the shift in power. Ethan attempted to regain composure, projecting authority, but the effort was shallow. He was reacting to a strategy he could not predict. My lawyer presented further documentation, emails, contracts, transaction histories, all meticulously organized. Each piece reinforced the previous evidence, weaving an airtight case that left Ethan's claims weak and inconsistent. The judge examined the materials with keen attention. The authenticity of these documents will require verification. Further proceedings are necessary. Ethan's face betrayed frustration and disbelief. His confidence had been eroded systematically, replaced by unease. He glanced at the woman beside him, her attempts at composure now completely gone. I remained calm, silent, observing the subtle power shift. For years, I had endured manipulation, control, and dismissive arrogance. Now, the narrative had changed. The courtroom, once a place of intimidation, had become a stage for clarity and truth. My lawyer leaned in, speaking softly. We are approaching the final phase. Patience now is key. He cannot recover. I exhaled, feeling the weight of my years of restraint and calculation lift slightly. The court was not a place for theatrics. It was a place for facts, precision, and truth. And those elements were now firmly in my hands. In the following week, additional evidence surfaced. Records that Ethan had assumed were obscure or irrelevant were now central to the case. Each revelation chipped away at his control, leaving him visibly strained. When the court reconvened, Ethan's demeanor had shifted entirely. Where once he radiated confidence, there was now caution, tension, uncertainty. His legal team was equally cautious, aware that every misstep could be exploited. My lawyer remained composed, presenting evidence with quiet authority. Each point was precise, each argument reinforced by documentation. The court observed, whispers circulating, noting the subtle but irreversible shift in power. By the end of the session, Ethan had no room to maneuver. The woman beside him, once a symbol of arrogance and confidence, had retreated entirely, leaving him to face the consequences alone. I felt no triumph in spectacle, no loud declaration of victory. Only calm, deliberate satisfaction. For years, I had been patient. For years, I had observed. For years, I had built a foundation that was now unshakable. As I left the courthouse into the late afternoon light, I felt a quiet liberation. The narrative of my life, once controlled by someone else's arrogance, was finally being rewritten. Precision, patience, and truth had prevailed. I walked slowly, deliberately, aware of every step, every detail, every moment. For the first time, I felt in full control, not through force, not through anger, but through carefully orchestrated truth. And in that calm, deliberate control, I realized something profound. Power is never about intimidation. Power is about preparation, clarity, and timing. The storm had begun. And this time, it was on my terms. The sunlight outside the courthouse had begun to soften into late afternoon, but the tension I felt inside was still sharp. I walked slowly down the steps, my lawyer beside me, papers in hand, her gaze steady and unreadable. Every step I took was deliberate, measured. For years, I had moved through life cautiously, silently, often underestimated. Today, that caution had transformed into a weapon. Ethan's reaction in the courtroom had been subtle, but I had noticed every flicker of doubt, every moment his carefully cultivated confidence wavered. That was the turning point. A man who had always believed himself untouchable now questioned, even briefly, the reality he thought was his to control. Back in the office, my lawyer and I spread out the documents again. This was the meticulous part, the work that no one outside a courtroom could appreciate, cross-checking account statements, verifying timestamps, confirming the legitimacy of property transfers, and ensuring that every transaction had a paper trail. "You see this?" she said, pointing to a series of bank transfers. He assumed these would remain hidden in complex corporate structures. But each one is traceable. Each one tells a story. And that story supports your claim entirely. I nodded, absorbing the significance of her words. Years of observation, patience, and strategic silence had converged in these documents. Ethan had underestimated the quiet strength I had developed over the years. His arrogance blinded him to the fact that preparation often outweighs boldness. The next court session was scheduled for the following week. As I arrived, I noticed a subtle difference. Ethan's posture, once perfect and commanding, was slightly rigid. The woman beside him, who had previously projected quiet control, now seemed uncertain. They're synchronized. Confidence, once a calculated display of power, was cracking under scrutiny. The session began. Ethan's lawyer attempted to assert dominance immediately, outlining claims, projecting certainty. But this time, the court atmosphere had changed. Observers sensed the subtle shift in power. Ethan's arguments, once commanding, now sounded defensive. His voice faltered on minor details. When it was my lawyer's turn, she moved with quiet authority. Each statement was deliberate, each document submitted with precision. No theatrics. No loud proclamations. Just facts. Carefully, methodically, she dismantled each claim made by Ethan's team. The court should note, she said, that certain accounts previously unreported contain transfers from joint funds. These transfers are documented and verifiable, clearly demonstrating shared ownership. Ethan's expression changed. He leaned toward the woman beside him, whispering urgently. She whispered back, eyes wide. Their confidence was unraveling in real time, subtle but undeniable. The judge reviewed the documents carefully. The court will require additional time to verify these transactions, she said. Today's ruling is suspended until review is complete. The courtroom emptied slowly. Ethan's attempt to project control had failed. The woman beside him avoided eye contact, her composure gone. I walked out with calm, deliberate steps, feeling the weight of years of preparation finally manifesting. That evening, I sat alone at home, reviewing every document. There was a certain satisfaction in the silence, in knowing that every number, every transfer, every account had been checked, verified, and recorded. My lawyer's work had been meticulous, but so had mine. Every detail mattered. Every small discrepancy could be used strategically in court. The following days brought a flurry of legal maneuvering. Ethan attempted to challenge the newly submitted evidence, calling witnesses, questioning details, demanding explanations. Each attempt, however, was met with precise counter-evidence, carefully prepared and indisputable. I watched from the sidelines as his confidence eroded further. Where he had once exuded certainty, he now appeared tense and defensive. His legal team, aware of the meticulous preparation behind my claims, moved cautiously, hesitant to overreach. By midweek, additional documentation arrived, contracts, correspondence, and transaction records that painted a complete picture of shared assets and previously undisclosed transactions. Each piece reinforced the previous evidence, leaving Ethan's claims fragmented and inconsistent. When the court reconvened, the tension was palpable. Observers whispered among themselves, noting the subtle but undeniable shift. Ethan attempted to maintain a facade of control, but it was strained, shallow, and increasingly transparent. My lawyer presented the final pieces of evidence with calm authority. "Your Honor," she said, "these documents provide a comprehensive overview of joint assets and previously undisclosed accounts. They corroborate the claims made by the petitioner and establish a clear pattern of shared ownership and entitlement." The judge examined the materials thoroughly, flipping through pages, verifying calculations, reviewing dates. The court acknowledges receipt of these documents. Verification is ongoing, and further proceedings will follow as necessary. Ethan's composure faltered completely. The woman beside him looked on helplessly, her earlier confidence gone. Every attempt he made to regain control seemed forced, desperate. I felt no satisfaction in spectacle, no need to gloat. What mattered was the clarity of truth, the precision of preparation, the inevitability of justice. I had waited patiently for this moment. Now it was unfolding exactly as planned. Later, outside the courthouse, the sunlight had softened further. My lawyer walked beside me silent. For a moment before speaking, "Everything is moving as expected," she said. "He cannot recover from this. The foundation you've built is unshakable." I nodded, feeling the weight of those words. For years, I had endured manipulation, subtle intimidation, and the quiet erosion of personal agency. Now, the narrative had shifted. The strategy was unfolding. The courtroom, once a place of fear, had become a stage for truth and methodical victory. The week progressed. Ethan's attempts to challenge the evidence became increasingly frantic. Calls, letters, and legal objections arrived daily, but each was met with calm, methodical responses. Every argument he attempted to make was anticipated, countered, and neutralized. Meanwhile, the woman who had accompanied him, a symbol of his arrogance and assumed superiority, withdrew entirely. Her influence diminished, and she no longer projected control or confidence. She had become irrelevant in the unfolding proceedings. I spent hours each night reviewing files, emails, and transaction histories. Every detail mattered. Every small piece of evidence could be leveraged to reinforce the overarching case. The patience and preparation of years had led to this concentrated moment of action. When the next court session arrived, Ethan's demeanor had shifted entirely. Where once he had projected confidence, now there was tension, caution, and visible uncertainty. His legal team acted with restraint, aware that any misstep could be exploited. My lawyer presented evidence with quiet authority, detailing joint assets, transactions, and account histories in a clear, methodical manner. Each point reinforced the previous, leaving no room for ambiguity or misinterpretation. The judge listened intently, occasionally pausing to examine documentation. "Verification of these accounts and assets will continue," she said. Further proceedings will be scheduled to finalize rulings. Ethan's face betrayed frustration. His once unwavering confidence had been eroded systematically. The woman beside him had withdrawn completely, leaving him isolated in his faltering strategy. I remained calm, observing the subtle but irreversible shift in control. Years of endurance, careful observation, and strategic silence had culminated in this moment. The courtroom, a space that had once symbolized intimidation and dominance, now reflected precision, clarity, and truth. My lawyer leaned in, speaking softly. "We're approaching the final stage," she said. "Every move now must be deliberate. His influence is gone. The remaining steps are procedural." I exhaled, feeling a quiet sense of liberation. The years of restraint, observation, and preparation had borne fruit. The strategy, executed precisely, was undeniable. In the subsequent days, additional documents were submitted, contracts, emails, and recorded communications that confirmed shared investments and joint ownership. Every attempt Ethan made to assert authority faltered. His claims were undermined systematically, his confidence shattered by the precision of preparation and evidence. By the next court session, Ethan's posture and demeanor reflected the collapse of his previously dominant persona. Every argument was met with calm, indisputable evidence, and the court observed the gradual but undeniable shift in power. The woman beside him, once an embodiment of influence and arrogance, had disappeared from the proceedings. Ethan faced the reality of his situation alone. I remained composed, silently observing the unraveling of a narrative that had once controlled me. Precision, preparation, and patience had transformed fear into empowerment. As I exited the courthouse into the late afternoon light, I felt a sense of quiet liberation. The life that had been overshadowed by another's arrogance was now firmly within my control. The storm of legal strategy and meticulous planning had begun. And this time, the following morning, the courthouse loomed larger than usual, casting its shadow over the quiet city street. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted completely. Where there had once been arrogance and assumed control, now there was tension, subtle but palpable. Ethan entered the courtroom, his steps measured, deliberate, but lacking the confidence that had always defined him. The woman who had accompanied him, once a symbol of support and dominance, remained absent, a silent acknowledgement of the unraveling situation. I walked in calmly, shoulders squared, expression neutral. My lawyer followed, carrying a neat stack of documents, her movements precise and unhurried. Every eye in the room seemed to register the subtle power shift. Observers sensed it, even if they could not articulate it. The game had changed. The session began with the judge reviewing the newly submitted documents. Each page, meticulously prepared, detailed transactions, property records, and account statements that had been overlooked or intentionally omitted. My lawyer's presentation was clear and methodical. She laid out each piece of evidence, emphasizing transparency, legality, and factual accuracy. Ethan's legal team attempted to interject, questioning minor details, seeking procedural loopholes, but my lawyer anticipated every move. She countered each objection with precision, her calm authority contrasting sharply with the frustration beginning to show on Ethan's face. "The court is in receipt of all submitted materials," the judge said finally. "Verification is ongoing. All claims will be evaluated thoroughly before a ruling can be made." Ethan's confidence was visibly shaken. He leaned forward, whispering to his attorney, trying to maintain composure, but the effort was transparent. Years of assumed control had evaporated under scrutiny, replaced by doubt and uncertainty. After the session, we returned to a quiet hallway for a private discussion. My lawyer spread out the next set of documents, each one a piece in a carefully constructed mosaic. "These are communications, internal memos, and contracts that reinforce your claim," she explained. "Every transfer, every investment is now traceable. There is no ambiguity." I studied the documents, noting the meticulous detail. Each line, each date, each signature had been accounted for. Ethan had relied on appearances and assumptions. I relied on facts and precision. The difference was now undeniable. Over the next few days, additional legal maneuvers followed. Ethan's attempts to dispute evidence became increasingly desperate. Calls to his attorney, demands for clarification, objections filed in rapid succession, yet each was met with calm, thorough responses, systematically dismantling any argument he attempted to assert. The courtroom, once a space dominated by his confidence, was now a stage for deliberate strategy. Observers noticed the subtle power shift. The energy in the room, once weighted toward intimidation, now leaned toward verification and factual clarity. On the day of the final session for evidence presentation, the tension was almost tangible. Ethan entered, posture rigid, face taut with effort. My lawyer and I were prepared, each document cross-referenced, every statement verified. We moved with quiet authority, submitting the remaining records with precision. Your Honor, my lawyer said, voice steady. These records provide a comprehensive overview of joint ownership, asset distribution, and financial transparency. They establish factual clarity and support the petitioner's claims completely. Ethan's reaction was immediate, a tight frown, quick, sharp breaths, the subtle shaking of a hand resting on the table. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering, eyes darting toward the judge and me. Every attempt at persuasion faltered under the weight of undeniable documentation. The judge examined each document thoroughly, flipping pages, making notes, and occasionally looking directly at Ethan. This court acknowledges the receipt of all materials, the judge said. Further proceedings will finalize the assessment of claims, assets, and property distribution. Outside the courtroom, the atmosphere was quiet, subdued. The sun cast long shadows, the day feeling heavier than usual. Ethan walked past, shoulders slightly hunched, the once visible aura of control diminished. The woman, whose presence had been intended to signal influence, remained absent. My lawyer turned to me. It's coming together, she said softly. The final phase is procedural now. Control has shifted. The remaining steps are formalities. I nodded, feeling the quiet satisfaction of precision and patience. This was not triumph in spectacle or public display, but a methodical, undeniable reclaiming of agency. The years of preparation, observation, and careful action were finally manifesting. The following week, the court scheduled the final review. Additional evidence had been verified, inconsistencies noted, and every claim cross-referenced. Ethan's legal team attempted last-minute objections, but they were anticipated, countered, and neutralized. Every move they made only reinforced the solidity of my position. As the final session commenced, Ethan's demeanor reflected complete erosion of control. His attempts at projecting confidence were strained, shallow, and transparent. The courtroom audience noticed the subtle collapse of dominance. My lawyer, calm and precise, presented the evidence sequentially, each piece reinforcing the last. The judge paused frequently, flipping through the extensive documentation. The evidence presented is comprehensive, the judge stated. All claims will be considered and a formal ruling will follow. Further proceedings are scheduled for final judgment. Ethan's face betrayed frustration, disbelief, and exhaustion. The woman who had once symbolized his influence was absent. His isolation was complete. I remained composed, silently observing the unraveling of a narrative that had for years dictated my life. Precision, preparation, and patience had created a situation where truth and factual clarity dominated over arrogance and assumption. Later, walking down the courthouse steps, the cool breeze hit my face. I felt liberated, not through confrontation or public spectacle, but through careful orchestration, strategic planning, and methodical action. The power that had once been wielded to intimidate was now neutralized by clarity and fact. In the following days, further documentation and final reviews reinforced the case. Every argument Ethan attempted to make was anticipated and countered. His legal maneuvers had no weight against meticulously verified evidence. By the final session, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Ethan entered, face pale, posture stiff. He attempted to assert authority, but every gesture and word betrayed unease. My lawyer presented the verified, consolidated evidence, systematically closing any remaining gaps. The judge reviewed each document, occasionally looking up, then back down. All evidence has been presented and verified. The court will deliberate and issue a ruling based on documented facts and legal merit. As we left the courtroom, I felt a quiet triumph. This was not loud. This was not dramatic. It was precise, controlled, and undeniable. Every step, every observation, every carefully prepared document had led to this moment. Ethan's confidence, once unwavering, had been systematically dismantled. His reliance on appearances and assumptions had failed. The courtroom, once a space of intimidation, now reflected methodical truth, clarity, and precision. I walked slowly, deliberately, aware of every step, every sound, every movement. The years of patience, endurance, and careful preparation had culminated in a situation where control and agency were fully restored to me. Power, I realized, was not about intimidation. Power was about preparation, clarity, patience, and timing. The storm had passed, and this time, it was fully on my terms. The morning of the final deliberation felt unusually quiet. The courthouse, normally buzzing with activity, was calm, almost expectant. I arrived early, my steps deliberate, my expression neutral. My lawyer walked beside me, calm as ever, carrying her organized stack of papers. The documents had been reviewed, verified, and prepared for the final stage. Every detail accounted for. Every fact aligned. Inside the courtroom, Ethan was already seated, his posture tense, shoulders tight. The aura of control that had once defined him was replaced by uncertainty. The woman who had accompanied him previously was nowhere in sight. Her absence seemed to amplify his isolation. He attempted a smile at his lawyer, but it faltered, revealing the stress he had tried to mask. The judge entered, commanding attention with measured authority. Everyone stood, then sat as the session commenced. My lawyer rose first, presenting a clear summary of the verified documents, outlining every account, property, and financial transaction. Each statement was precise, evidence-backed, and undeniable. Ethan's lawyer attempted interruptions, raising objections, but each was anticipated and methodically countered. The courtroom watched as the narrative, long assumed to favor him, began to shift irreversibly. Your Honor, my lawyer stated calmly, we have provided comprehensive evidence detailing asset ownership, account activity, and joint investments. Every claim is documented and verified. The judge examined the documents with careful scrutiny. The court acknowledges receipt of all materials. A thorough review will be conducted before issuing a ruling. Ethan's expression was tight, his confidence diminished. He whispered to his attorney repeatedly, trying to regain some semblance of control, but the precision of the evidence left him no leverage. After the session, we exited into the courthouse hallway. The air felt charged, yet strangely liberating. My lawyer turned to me. We are in the final stages. The court's review is meticulous, but the foundation you've built is solid. There is no ambiguity. I nodded silently. Years of observation, strategy, and quiet endurance had led to this moment. I had learned patience, the art of subtlety, and the power of preparation. All of it had been worth it. Over the following days, the court continued reviewing every piece of evidence. Ethan's attempts to challenge or discredit any documentation were systematically addressed and neutralized. His confidence continued to erode, replaced by visible tension. Each legal maneuver he attempted only highlighted the solidity of the case I had meticulously constructed. I spent those days calmly reviewing every file, ensuring that nothing had been overlooked. Every transaction, email, contract, and account statement was cross-referenced. The meticulous work, both mine and my lawyers, ensured there was no room for error or misinterpretation. The final session for judgment was scheduled for the following week. I entered the courtroom with a calm certainty I had never felt before. Ethan's posture was rigid, his attempts at composure strained. Observers could sense the shift. The courtroom, once dominated by his presence and assumed authority, now subtly reflected my control through preparedness and evidence. My lawyer presented the consolidated records again, highlighting discrepancies, verifying transactions, and reinforcing claims of joint ownership and entitlement. The documents were indisputable, precise, and comprehensive. The judge listened intently, occasionally flipping through the extensive files. All evidence has been reviewed. The court acknowledges the thoroughness and clarity of the documentation provided. The ruling will reflect documented facts and legal merit. Ethan's face betrayed frustration, disbelief, and a dawning realization of the magnitude of his situation. His legal team could no longer assert dominance, constrained by the precision and clarity of our preparation. After the session, as we stepped outside, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not through confrontation, not through loud declarations, but through deliberate, methodical, and strategic execution. Years of restraint, patience, and observation had culminated in this moment of undeniable clarity. In the following days, final preparations for asset distribution and legal formalities continued. Every detail was verified, cross-referenced, and confirmed. Ethan's attempts to assert influence were met with calm, methodical responses, leaving him no leverage. The woman who had accompanied him previously remained absent. Any influence or support she might have provided was gone, leaving him isolated and unable to assert control. Finally, the court scheduled the session to issue the ruling. The room was quiet, tension palpable, yet balanced by the certainty of preparation and evidence. My lawyer presented the final summary, each statement supported by documentation, verified and cross-referenced. Ethan attempted to speak, to object, to assert authority, but his gestures were hesitant, his words faltering. Every attempt was countered with calm precision, leaving the courtroom fully aware of the meticulous strength of my position. The judge paused, reviewing the summary. The evidence presented is comprehensive and verified. The court finds the documentation clear and authoritative. All claims, ownership, and entitlements will be distributed in accordance with verified facts and legal standards. The ruling was methodical, precise, and irrefutable. Ethan's claims were diminished, every attempt at dominance neutralized by fact, evidence, and strategy. As the court session concluded, Ethan sat in stunned silence. His composure, once unshakable, was fractured. The courtroom, once a place of intimidation, had transformed into a stage where clarity, preparation, and truth dominated. I walked out slowly, deliberately, aware of every sound, every step, every detail. For years, I had been patient, strategic, and meticulous. Now, the storm had passed, and control was fully restored to me. Power, I realized again, was not about intimidation. It was about preparation, clarity, timing, and patience. The narrative that had once been manipulated and controlled by arrogance was now firmly in my hands. Outside, the sunlight bathed the courthouse steps in a golden glow. I felt liberated, composed, and confident. The story of my life, long overshadowed, was finally being written on my own terms. The storm had ended, not with confrontation, but with precision. And this time, the outcome was undeniable. The days following the court's ruling were quiet, but the tension in the air had shifted. The courthouse, once the center of confrontation, had released its hold, leaving reality to settle into place. I walked through the city streets with a calm, measured pace. Every step felt deliberate as if marking the reclamation of my life, of control that had long been denied. Ethan was nowhere in sight, his once commanding presence reduced to rumors and speculation. The woman who had accompanied him, once a symbol of assumed dominance, had vanished from the public narrative entirely. Their absence signaled the collapse of influence they had tried to assert over me. Inside the quiet of my office, my lawyer and I reviewed the final documentation. Each page reflected the undeniable clarity of fact and truth. Asset transfers had been verified, properties distributed, accounts reconciled. Every detail had been accounted for. Each line, each number, each record testified to precision and patience. "You did everything perfectly," my lawyer said softly. "Every piece of evidence was anticipated." The ruling is final and there is no room for challenge. I nodded, feeling a calm satisfaction that was quiet but absolute. Years of patience, observation, and strategy had led to this moment. For once, the narrative of my life was completely under my control. The city outside was bustling with life, but I felt detached from the rush. This was a moment of personal resolution, a private acknowledgement of victories earned through meticulous planning rather than spectacle. When the formal distribution of assets began, Ethan's legal team attempted minor procedural interventions, but each was met with calm, authoritative responses. There was no room for manipulation, no space for intimidation. The process was methodical, deliberate, and final. As I signed the final documents, a quiet sense of empowerment settled over me. Each signature, each acknowledgement, reinforced a reality I had patiently built, that precision, strategy, and patience were far more powerful than arrogance and assumed authority. After the courthouse emptied, I walked outside into the crisp late afternoon air. The sunlight was soft, golden, illuminating the steps where so many moments of tension and preparation had unfolded. I paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, feeling the weight of freedom and clarity settle around me. Ethan, once a figure of control and influence, had become a shadow of himself. The strategy he had relied upon had been dismantled piece by piece, systematically and silently. The courtroom, once dominated by his presence, now reflected the quiet authority of truth and preparation. Over the following days, I began to reclaim routines and aspects of life that had been overshadowed. Every step, every decision, was now mine. There was no need for haste, no pressure to perform or impress. Each choice was deliberate, conscious, reflection of independence restored. The people around me began to notice the change, not outwardly dramatic, but subtle. Confidence, calm authority, and a quiet sense of control replaced what had once been tension and suppression. The narrative had shifted completely, and it was now mine to guide. One evening, as I sat reviewing correspondence and finalizing minor administrative details, a reflection caught my eye in the window. For the first time in years, I recognized not just the woman who had endured, but the person who had quietly strategized, observed, and acted with precision. Strength was no longer a borrowed or reactive trait, it was inherent. Ethan's absence, the lack of interference from those who once tried to influence me, allowed the space for clarity to emerge. Every move I had made was validated not through confrontation, but through meticulous preparation and the inevitable unfolding of truth. In the days that followed, minor adjustments to asset distribution, account reconciliation, and legal formalities were completed. Each step was procedural, confirming what had already been established. Control, clarity, and empowerment were fully restored. I realized then that patience was not passive. Observation was not idle. Strategy was not static. All these elements combined had created a situation where victory was inevitable, not through force, not through aggression, but through precision, timing, and clarity. As I walked home one evening, the city lights reflecting softly on wet pavements, I felt a quiet satisfaction unlike any before. The storm of legal battles, of tension and preparation, had passed. The outcomes, fully documented and verified, were undeniable. Ethan's influence was gone. The woman's presence no longer mattered. The courtroom had rendered judgment not only on assets, but on authority and assumption. Truth, preparation, and patience had prevailed. I entered my apartment quietly, deliberately. No one was there to witness my arrival, and yet I felt a profound sense of personal triumph. This was not public spectacle, it was control, fully reclaimed and acknowledged internally. Sitting by the window, I reflected on the months of careful planning, observation, and execution. Each step, each document, each strategic pause had been necessary. The power once held by arrogance and assumed dominance had been dismantled systematically. The night grew quiet, yet in that quiet, there was clarity. Life could now proceed without fear, without manipulation, without the shadow of control from another. The narrative was entirely mine. For the first time in years, I felt truly empowered. Every detail, every preparation, every step taken in patience and observation had led to this undeniable truth. Control, clarity, and independence had been restored. And as I finally allowed myself to relax, the weight of tension lifted completely. The storm was over and the horizon was clear. The first morning after the final legal proceedings felt surreal. The courthouse steps were quiet, almost serene. The weight that had been pressing on me for months, the tension, the anticipation, the uncertainty, was gone. I walked through the streets of the city with a calm, deliberate pace. Every step was measured, every breath purposeful. The storm had passed, and for the first time, clarity reigned. Ethan was no longer a looming presence. His attempts to influence, intimidate, or manipulate had been dismantled systematically, leaving only fragments of the authority he had once wielded. The woman who had once accompanied him, a symbol of support and arrogance, had disappeared entirely from the narrative. Their absence was final, undeniable. In my office, my lawyer and I reviewed the last pieces of administrative work, account reconciliations, property transfer confirmations, and final signatures. Every document reflected the truth of months of careful preparation. Every transaction, every record, every minor detail had been verified. The work was complete, leaving no room for dispute or confusion. "You've done everything exactly as planned," my lawyer said quietly. "The rulings are final. The final distributions are confirmed. There is no challenge left." I nodded, absorbing the significance of her words. The years of patience, observation, and strategy had culminated not in a dramatic showdown, but in a quiet, undeniable reclamation of agency. In the days that followed, I began to rebuild routines and reclaim control over aspects of life that had long been overshadowed. Every decision, every action, now came from me. Independence was no longer theoretical, it was absolute. The city outside my window moved as it always did, oblivious to the meticulous battle that had just concluded. But I felt every step of it. Every calculated decision, every careful observation, every moment of patience had brought me here. The narrative of my life was now entirely my own. As the final property and financial settlements were executed, I noticed a subtle shift in my own demeanor. Confidence was no longer borrowed or reactive, it was inherent. The experience had taught me that control was not about intimidation or aggression. It was about preparation, observation, timing, and clarity. Ethan's absence reinforced the finality of the situation. He had relied on appearances, assumed authority, and intimidation. I had relied on facts, patience, and meticulous strategy. The outcome was inevitable, and it had been realized. One evening, I walked along the quiet streets near my apartment. The city lights reflected softly on the wet pavement. For the first time in years, I felt complete clarity. The tension that had followed me for months was gone. The anxiety of uncertainty had dissipated. I was free not just from legal complications, but from the subtle psychological weight that had accompanied years of manipulation. Returning home, I sat by the window, reflecting on the months of struggle and preparation. Every small decision had mattered. Every step of patience, every strategic pause, every observation had been necessary. The power that had once been wielded to intimidate was now replaced by the quiet authority of fact and preparation. In those quiet moments, I realized the depth of personal transformation I had undergone. I was no longer simply reacting to the world or to Ethan's influence. I was acting deliberately, with foresight and clarity. The years of careful preparation had not only reclaimed material possessions, they had reclaimed my autonomy, my confidence, and my voice. The court's ruling had been final. The assets distributed according to the verified documentation. Ethan's attempts to assert control had been nullified, and the presence of the woman who had once supported him had disappeared entirely. The narrative was mine, unchallenged and undeniable. Over the next several weeks, I began to implement changes in daily life that reflected this regained control. Personal routines, financial decisions, and professional steps were all made with deliberate consideration, free from the shadows of past manipulation. Even mundane tasks carried significance. Each phone call, each email, each interaction became an exercise in deliberate autonomy. Every decision was mine to make, guided by foresight and clarity rather than fear or expectation. I also reflected on the personal lessons the experience had imparted. Patience was not weakness. Observation was not passivity. Strategy was not static. The careful accumulation of facts, preparation, and quiet planning had yielded a victory that no amount of arrogance or intimidation could overturn. As the city moved around me, unaware of the internal transformation that had taken place, I felt an unprecedented sense of freedom. For the first time, life was entirely mine to navigate. Every future decision, every step forward, would be guided by the clarity and agency I had painstakingly reclaimed. Months passed. Routine, once overshadowed by tension and uncertainty, now carried a sense of peace. The court rulings, asset distributions, and reconciled accounts were all finalized. The legal battles were behind me, leaving only the quiet satisfaction of accomplishment. One evening, sitting in my apartment, I gazed out at the city skyline. The lights reflected softly on the river below, and for the first time in years, I felt unburdened, empowered, and in complete control. Every decision, every action, and every thought was now guided by deliberate intention. The story of this chapter of my life, once dominated by another's arrogance and assumed authority, was finally complete. The storm had passed, replaced by clarity, control, and the quiet satisfaction of strategy executed with precision. In that stillness, I understood the full scope of the journey. Not the battle, not the confrontation, but the deliberate accumulation of preparation, patience, and truth had delivered resolution. The outcome had been inevitable because it had been meticulously orchestrated, calmly pursued, and patiently executed. As night fell over the city, I finally allowed myself to breathe fully, unburdened by the shadow of the past. Control, clarity, and independence had been fully restored. The storm was over. And in that quiet, deliberate victory, I knew I had reclaimed not just assets, not just legal standing, but myself entirely.